earlier. Torture, massive oppression.
Yeah, basic necessities, basic freedoms.
Right,
yeah.
people not having access to clean water,
Yeah.
access to even rudimentary healthcare, access to education and other enrichment opportunities. Real economic hardship where you're living in houses that are tiny and unsanitary. I went to India. There was a place where all these houses along the side of a river, and they were beaten out of old oil drums. So they took the drum, I assume they contained oil. I mean, who knows what was in them? Could have been something even more toxic than that. And they were flattened out into sheets, and they built these little huts out of them along the river. And they were probably about the size of half of this studio, the whole, and there would be families living in these houses. Clearly, no plumbing, no basic amenities, things that we take for granted in America. I think that's how a lot of people in the world live in these conditions that we would regard as just horrifically tough. So those things, maybe not always, but often would get in the way of people experiencing joy. So, a core aspect of your mission, your ideology, your vision, what drives you is to remove some of these impediments. But what is joy? Like, what is it that gives you, like, those are the negative things, those are the things that are standing in the way, but what is happiness? Do you experience happiness if you just get rid of all those things? If you have all your needs taken care of, you have clean water, enough to eat, shelter, are you then happy? Or does happy have a positive component to it? Is it something that you actually have to reach for and strive for?
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, having your necessities taken care of is, it's not a, it's not a key, not a guarantee of happiness. I mean, I think happiness is much more, it's a very subtle thing. And in a way, you're really, I mean, you are ultimately incredibly limited to how much you can affect the happiness of another being. I mean, if you have, I mean, lots of people have family members who have money, have jobs, but there's so many things that can make you miserable. So many addictions or other or fears or just the desire for love and companionship and not figuring out how to satisfy that. I mean, those are. It's almost like there's well, the way I've talked about it is there's an internal world and an external world, and in the internal world where you're, which is, I actually think it is more important than the external world, what's going, and it's really the place that you have the most power. But the internal world, you're largely on your own for how you figure out what will it take to make myself actually feel good about life and feel good about the world. And the tools and activities you do to try to deal with that are very different than in the external world. And for me, it's meditation is sort of my primary tool for sorting through that, for exploring that, looking at what's alive in me, what forces are going on, what things feel out of place or discontent, and trying to then figure out what can I do or change to make myself feel happier about life. And really that process is what drew me to activism. And it was, but not in the sense that if I can help everyone on earth have clean water, it'll make me happy. It was just sort of an extension of the things I was doing that were making me happy.
There's a broadening of that.
Yeah, and it's also about connection. It was about, because I think part of happiness is you see other people that are like, maybe not happy, but they're fired up about life and they're doing things that are interesting. And then if you join forces with them or you connect with them, you sort of it's still almost kind of selfish. You're still sort of like feeding off their joy and energy. And it's like feeding you, but a lot of the people
Make
doing
it sound so vampiric. Like
well,
sucking the
I don't,
energy from
it's very mutual often,
Right.
I mean, people aren't,
symbiotic.
yeah, it's a symbiotic thing.
Like
But
slime molds.
yes, exactly. I mean, I don't have a problem with the vampire analogy. It's like
They get a bad rap. But
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're feeding off the energy of others, but I mean, generally, it like you're giving back energy. And you're
eternal
giving back.
life. Right? Like, surely that's a pretty good trade-off.
Well, I don't really see how that metaphor, that part of it, doesn't really.
We might be
really-
drifting.
Yeah,
We
we're
might be
drifting a little
We're
bit.
drifting. Yeah.
Although, yeah. What are you talking about? Yes.
One thing that I find puzzle, something that I've thought about a lot is, here we are in this nation that is astoundingly wealthy, just astonishingly rich, the U.S. I talk to my daughter about this a lot. I have a daughter who's 12 years old, and it's come up frequently. And I've done a lot of traveling to third world. I've seen a lot of really severe poverty. So I try to tell her, you live in a really rich country and you are really rich. She's like, we're not rich. We live in a 2-bedroom condo. I know people who have these really huge houses and have pools in their backyard. We're not even remotely rich. We're barely better than poor is her perspective.
Yeah.
So I try to convey some perspective. Like, there are people who are richer than us in the U.S., but on an international level, we are fabulously rich. And there's even there's charts you can find on the internet that will gauge your wealth and give you a percentage, internationally. And I think we're like in the top 1% of wealthy people internationally. So I bring this up on my phone and I show, look, you're in your top 1% most wealthy people in the world.
Yeah.
You need to stop whining about there being nothing to eat in the fridge.
I'm sure that works really well.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, this is just total nonsense. I refuse to believe this. But we're astoundingly rich, and there are people who definitely are not doing well. People who are really struggling, and as a police officer, I interact with a fair number of those people professionally. So people who are struggling with really severe mental health and maybe not getting the treatment that they need, or other medical issues. People who really don't have enough to eat. People who are grappling with addiction issues, or children in those households whose parents are grappling with addiction issues. So these are real severe problems. But generally, even if you're fairly poor in America, generally you're probably going to have enough to eat. You're going to have a place to live. You're going to have a fairly kind of clean, sanitary environment. You're going to have access to education. You have these things. So it seems like in the U.S., we should all be like blissfully happy. That we have these things. We're living in the promised land. This is the land overflowing with milk and honey. We have everything. I know I have everything, and I'm not considered wealthy by American standards, but I have everything I could need. I don't want for anything. Yet it seems like in the US there's an epidemic of misery.
Yeah.
It seems rare to encounter somebody who's like, I'm totally blissfully happy. And nobody's going to be blissfully happy all the time, but even to encounter people like, I'm generally, I feel like I've got it really good and I'm joyful. There's so many people struggling with depression and chronic anxiety. And why? It doesn't seem like there's any connection at all between having the wealth and experiencing the joy almost.
I wouldn't say there's no connection. I mean, if you don't have the necessities of life, you're at a massive disadvantage. And if you don't feel safe, going out of your home, or if you have violent oppression in your world, I can't even imagine how hard it is to have a happy life.
But it seems like depression should be a rarity not depression, because depression is a condition, it's a clinical condition, but being miserable should be this wild exception.
I I don't know. I just think, I mean, life is hard, and it's like, I think it's
like the student. I interact with a lot of,
Yeah.
I'm a really bad interviewer.
that's gonna go. You're doing great.
I spend a lot of time with students. I'm a school resource officer, so I spend
Yeah.
a lot of time in high schools,
Yeah.
and I talk to a lot of students. And what I hear over and over again from students is, school, it really, it's such a hateful thing. It really sucks. It's like being in prison.
Yeah.
They draw that analogy again and again and again. It's like being in prison. And when you think about that, in kind of international terms, comparing it to the deprivation in some of these countries, and you think about what
Or actual prison.
or actual prison, yes. All these adult, and I work in Middlebury. I interact a lot with the teachers, with the guidance staff, and these are adults who are dedicated to enriching the lives of their students for the most part. I mean, some of them are kind of a little bit burned out and maybe don't have as much drive as they
Yeah.
could, but for the most part, these are gifted individuals, intelligent individuals who have a lot to share, who are committed to making their students' lives better and richer. Yet that's the perspective, that's the view that
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, it comes down to your internal world, and it's just your internal world is it's such a challenge to figure out how to deal with our emotions, how to deal with our desires and our fears, and there's different solutions societies have come up with to try to help big populations navigate that.
Right.
And organized religion is one solution that it does have some things going for it, for making a population of people, deal with their internal world, but it's very authoritarian in telling people this is what all these things inside you mean, or this part of what you're feeling means God is talking to you. But there's a reason it's used, and it has been used throughout history because it can give people a structure for how to deal with their internal world and tell them, well, this is what the meaning of life is, this is what the path is, this is what you should care about, and actually tell them you're happy because you're doing this, this, and this, and you're going to go to heaven. But in our modern age, organized religion, at least in the U.S., is it seems to have become, at least for a portion of the U.S.,
right.
it's become far less powerful, and so people are now, now it depends. What do they use instead of religion to figure out how they navigate this stuff, and how do their parents have a way to really teach them how to navigate your internal world?
I mean, there's still a lot of deeply religious people, and
Yeah.
there's certain parts of the U.S. where a large proportion of the people are deeply religious, and there are people who are deeply nationalistic as well. I think of these things,
Yeah.
we were talking about that before, but these are things that provide a lot of identity, a sense of identity, a sense of meaning in people's lives. And I think you're right that for a large segment of the population, these things are no longer relevant. They don't have as much force as they used to have, or no force at all. They're really failing to.
But what it really comes down to, the challenge of every human life is you have to figure out what's actually important.
Right.
And you might have religions telling you one thing is important. You have maybe nationalistic, people telling you this is what's important. And you have, every friend, every person telling you what is important. And you have to actually decide what is important. And it's, if you're not going to just surrender the authority of that decision to another person or organization and just say, I'm just going to trust this book or this person to tell me what's important, you're going to take the weight of that on yourself to decide what's important.
Sure.
Then, you're at the point every, existential philosopher that's ever lived in trying to figure out what the heck is life about, what's important, what's going to make me happy, and how do I get there.
Well, that's the essence of existentialism right there, is that struggle
Yeah.
to generate meaning without relying upon
Yeah.
authority.
And a lot of those existential philosophers were not incredibly happy.
No, they don't come across as such. No.
No, they did not seem. I mean,
No.
that's why
there's a lot of angst.
Yeah.
That's kind of the character of the literature and the philosophy.
Yeah.
But there's heroism there too, because
Yeah.
you know that it's
And honesty. They're really like saying, we are
yeah.
trying to be honest,
Mhm.
and some of them were like, we honestly believe life sucks. And it's absurd, everything is meaningless. And some of them, I think, sort of then went from that to, well, therefore, life can be anything, and we can define its meaning. I don't know how well they embodied that in their actual lives, because
You didn't know them
I
personally.
didn't know them personally.
Yeah. You
But
didn't-
that's one of the
didn't
reasons.
hang with Camus. Or,
No.
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 Dostoevsky was a little before your time. Right?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Dostoevsky didn't come off as incredibly happy to me.
No, not
But-
the best dinner guest.
No. But the one who did is
Yeah.
Thoreau. That is one of the reasons I love Henry David Thoreau,
Right.
because it's almost like you have to like just take as a premise
Mhm.
that life is a gift, and it is an amazing, glorious gift. It's like, and I'm going to try to suck the marrow of life. You know, it's like,
Mhm.
it's, you know, whether or not that's, you know, I mean, it's almost like a thing you take on faith.
Mhm.
Um,
It's like sucking the juice out of life.
yeah, it's all about the
it's
juice of
It
life.
comes back to the juice. I get
Yeah.
it. Yeah. But if you wanted advice about how to be happy, right? If that was something you were genuinely going to somebody seeking advice on that, like, it wouldn't make much sense to trust the advice of somebody who's miserable.
Well, yeah. Well, of course. And
Yeah.
and so that's why, you know, I'm drawn to writers that clearly are like, you know, like they're happy, or they're showing joy in what they're doing. And I kind of feel like fundamentally, and this is something that does come up, you know, in meditation, and you think about like being mindful in a moment with someone,
Sure.
or in any moment, it's, you always have a choice of choosing a more positive outlook on the moment, or choosing a more optimistic. You know, it's like I could be talking to you and being like, this is so boring, you know. This guy, it's like, man, he's droning on and
All
on.
the viewers are like, damn, yeah, dude,
Yes.
I'm with you.
Yeah. But the beauty of this moment is
I can't believe he's still talking and he has that annoying accent.
yeah,
Like,
he keeps interrupting the really interesting
yeah,
guest.
yeah.
But the amazing thing about the present moment is that the present moment is like, it's like a moment of magic. You know, this conversation could go anywhere, and even if you are doing everything you can to drive this conversation into the most boring area possible, I'm here too.
I just want to get back to the juice. Yeah.
Well, see, maybe you don't understand what the juice really is, and I have a better idea.
Probably.
And I can use
Yeah.
what I say or not say to try to, you know, and I can be optimistic about it. I can say, like, you know, there is potential here for a really interesting interaction. There is potential here. I could learn something from this moment, and just, and that's a choice. It's a choice to say, I am going to take my attention and look at the window towards something better in this moment versus the window towards all the bad places it could go. Could really, really, the universe is almost always split in two. There's always a better direction to go and a worse direction to go. And if you're focusing on the worst direction and just like fretting that and regretting it the whole time, you're going to go where your attention is. So if you just say, and it may be that the best place for this moment to go is for me to get up and leave. And if that's the case, then you can get up and leave. And that's a great, you know, I could do that if I was like really irritated, or I felt like there was nothing to be gained from this. But
But there's potential for something sublime.
yeah, and that's what meditation. That's one of the things It's a basic thing of meditation. It's just like, where's your attention? Is your attention, you know, they teach you to train on your breath or look at a candle or whatever, but that's really just teaching you, take control of your attention. You know, are you going to pay attention to the subjects that you don't want to go into and talk about? Or are you going to try to see through the fog of what's going on? What do you want to talk about? What is interesting? What And then there's always a choice of whether or not you talk. It's like a great way to reclaim what's going on in the moment is just to shut up.
Yeah.
And you don't have to respond when someone talks to you. And
so I think we should just sit here in silence and
yeah,
for the next 15 minutes.
Well, that's something I'm going to do on my podcast. It's called The Mindful Activist, but we're going to talk about activism. But when I interview people, like this, one of the last interviews I did, I told this young woman I was interviewing that don't feel rushed to answer my question. It's like, I don't care if we have 2 minutes of silence while you really think about what you want to say.
Sure.
But it's so hard to do that when the camera is rolling, because it's like if we sat here for 15 seconds of silence, we'd both feel like
it would be
there'd be like a rebellion. Everyone would turn off the camera. No one would watch anymore. The awkwardness would just like rise and rise and rise.
I know. Yeah.
But I think awkwardness is like a pathway to growth. If you think about it, if you're like a tree, there's growing pain. Awkwardness is just a type of growing pain. So I think there's actually great potential there in awkwardness. We shouldn't be so afraid of it. It's like, should like sink into it.
Channel our middle school selves.
Yeah, well, you're growing a lot in middle school.
Yeah,
Those
exactly.
awkward moments.
Well, again, I mean, talking about silence, though, like I think of our relationship, our connection together, and I think of my path to happiness. Happiness is also very important to me. I think it's something that we share as a basic kind of outlook, that basic perspective. And a lot of my first forays into joy.
Sorry, were you talking?
Like he's going to start talking about juice again.
Yeah, I'm still with you.
They were very solitary pursuits. Bringing that silence into myself, that kind of empty space, and then expanding outward from there. And one of the great things about the connection that I had, it was a bit romantic when we were back in college. I mean,
it was like total Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure.
But crusty.
Crusty Bill and Ted, that's what we, because we didn't shower much.
Right. So we go for long hikes out in the woods at night. And we would talk a lot, for sure. We would share our ideas. We were excited. We were young and very enthusiastic. But one of the things that we did a lot together was just be silent. We spent a lot of time very quiet together. And it's rare to be able to do that with people.
Have comfortable silence with someone.
Right.
Is, it's such a gift. Maybe, but if you think about that, it's like, what does that say about if you're in the bubble, the social bubble with someone, there cannot be silence. One of you has to be talking,
Right.
And then there's like this obligation that you have to be listening to what they're saying.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, and there are some people they're like, if you're in the bubble, there has to be talking or communication going on, and they get very upset if you are not responding to their social cues appropriately. And they genuinely, then they start to reinforce and change your behavior. And you have to then decide, am I going to comply with their expectations? And so it becomes, when you're in their bubble, you're like, oh, I'm complying with social expectations. And it's such an uncomfortable situation.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, it is magical to have a friendship or a relationship where you can talk, or when you could just stop talking and be silent for a long period of time, and then start talking again, and pick up on some thread. It's like we would have different threads going, different topics, and never knew which thread one of us would pick up.
It's exciting.
Yeah. It helps to be doing interesting stuff together, like walking through the woods or sitting by a campfire. I mean, if you're just sort of like sitting in your dorm room or something, it might be different, or sitting out in public or something.
Yeah. So is there any moment that stands out as iconic? Like when you think of joy, is there an image that flashes through? I mean, I know there have been so many moments, so many interactions with beauty, and times when you've drifted into this. I've been there for a lot of those moments where you've drifted into a deeper sense of the sublime.
Mm.
But
I would say,
is there one that's really iconic for you?
well, to me, it's dancing.
Right.
I mean, um, dancing, I think, it's a great metaphor for life, and it I think is actually one of the most enjoyable activities in life, whether it's dancing alone or dancing in a group of people. And I mean, another that comes to mind is doing art. You know, when I really have gotten absorbed in doing a painting or something, and often I'm doing a lot of dancing while I'm doing it. I'm listening to music and I'm painting, and then I dance around the room, or
Good.
and actually, it seems actually like the best times in my life, usually, you know, whether it's writing or even like computer programming, I often will take dance breaks, because I feel if I feel the joy of life, then, you know, it's like you have to have your entire body like dance around and move, and then while you're dancing, it like helps the brain work and helps you think through stuff.
Right. I like dance as a metaphor because there's a degree of control. There's a rhythm to the movements, to the way that you're moving, the way that your body is responding to the stimulus. But there's a degree of chaos as well. So it's this mixture, this organic kind of combination. And when it feels really good, you hit that kind of sweet spot where those two things are perfectly blended. Like, I love that about art as well. Like when I'm creating a painting or a poem, like there's a part of me, even a poem, which is fairly using language. You know, there's a part which is really well thought out and very conscious. And I'm trying to express a particular idea, but there's also an aspect of it when it's good, where it feels like the words are coming from somewhere else, and I'm making these bizarre connections on different levels. And
Yeah.
so this kind of intersection of the controlled and the chaotic.
Yeah, and that's why I prefer the sort of like the free form, chaotic dancing, as opposed to very structured, you know,
It's not
forms.
like ballroom dancing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although
Although I would like to see you in the outfits.
in the ballroom dancing outfits.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I'm sure I'd look good in them. But there's a form of dance I've been learning called fusion dancing. Have you heard of that?
No.
It's basically like they've taken swing dance and all these other forms of partner dancing, and they've fused them all together, but they just basically create a couple rules, a couple like basic guiding principles, and so if you and your partner know these basic guiding principles, again, you can do whatever you want, but you have like these subtle little hand signals and stuff to lead into complicated, you know, swing dance and lifts and all sorts of stuff, and so you know, that's another thing I've been exploring.
Right. Yeah. It's been fascinating chatting with you. I feel even after having had so many conversations in the past, just sitting down and talking with you now, there's things to discover.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the camera affects. You know, it's like it creates this energy of what are we going to talk about while we're being potentially listened to by your 10 or 20 people that watch this show.
That's right. Yeah, literally in the tens.
Literally in the tens of people. Well, and you know, and I'll share it on my website, and we'll see.
So that might double the viewerage.
No,
potentially.
no, but
in time,
maybe someday over the next
as the
10 years,
builds,
we'll have 10 to 20 viewers.
Great. So until next time, drive safe. May all your mischief be of the lawful persuasion.
what notion? I'm serious. Like.
Facebook is the only one. Alright, I guess I'll start. We should really only go an hour because I have to go to Seattle tonight. So, hello. Alright. So, pretend to enjoy it. Alright. All right, so welcome to what I believe is the 7th episode of The Mindful Activist. I'm the host of this podcast, and we're broadcasting live on Facebook and on YouTube. So I'm Matt Reddy. I am the founder of the Global Consensus Project, the creator of the Hive1.net activist platform, social media platform. What else? And I am also an elected politician. I'm a hospital commissioner here in East Jefferson County, Washington. Today I am very happy to have a good friend of mine, Jaleh. I've never said your last name. What's your?
Alma-E.
Alma-E.
Yes.
So, a good friend of mine who I never call by her last name. And so before I ask you to introduce yourself, I was going to introduce you in a way I've never introduced a guest before, which is with a little video introduction, which they'll see a little bit of on our giant screen here. So this is a little video from the day I met Jaleh, which was several years ago, back during the Occupy movement, and let's see how well this works. You know, I might have to I'm not sure it's fair to them to really be shown, but if you can see this is. No? It doesn't look like they can see it very well. But we have Jaleh in a police outfit, and you'll at least get to hear some of it.
How are we going to make it?
Are you kidding me? I got kids at home. I'm going to have to find more childcare.
Yeah, it sucks. How's your shoulder?
My shoulder is killing me.
Well, when we take him down, let me do the heavy lifting. Just back me up, will you, son?
All right, I'll call the shots. Take him down.
When we edit this together, we're going to we'll show it.
Hey, we're doing a direct action.
What's going on? Join us. Come over here.
Hey, come join us.
All right, so when this is spliced together, it will actually show the video on the screen. You'll be able to see it well. But this is a performance of, or a performance, the word, of the Poetic Justice Theater Ensemble, which you were a participant that day in that performance, and we'll come back to that. And so that was when I first noticed Jale existed in this universe. But then, after that, oh, it's sort of a shame this video doesn't show up. Maybe I'll just show the pictures. So, no, they don't really see that here. But there's a big, if you could see this, there is a big tent in front of Bank of America and a bunch of people here outside protesting.
That was actually a really great action.
It was.
Yeah, for those who don't know Port Townsend, it's a pretty small town on the Olympic Peninsula, and there was a really big turnout to basically occupy Bank of America, and the Poetic Justice Theater Ensemble, which I'm a member and trainer of, a program of the Mandala Center for Change, which I'm the co-director. We showed up to do a public performance as known as a forum theater project, which essentially invited people on the street who were watching to come step in and replace the character they saw struggling. And the little play that we did, which was just about 5 minutes long, was essentially a play about police brutality. Some protesters peacefully singing and linked arm, and these two police officers, myself.
That we can use the internet, which has connected the world in ways that it's never been connected before. You know, in the history of humanity, the last 50 years, we have suddenly created a world where people all over Earth can communicate and connect and potentially start making decisions together in a way that it was never possible before. And I think if we figure out a way to do that better, then we actually can just sort of start creating a human decision-making matrix or structure that is completely new, completely separate from these power pyramids that are all over Earth. We can create this really broad decision-making power structure that could have a lot of influence. You know, not necessarily tearing down these other pyramids of power, but maybe actually able to tell these pyramids of power what to do. You know, if there was, say in the U.S., if everyone or the vast majority of the people in the U.S. were actually connected online and able to really, instead of relying on polls, you know, currently that's how politicians, they stand up there in their power position, they let the CNN or whatever do a poll of 1,000 people on some major issue, and they say that somehow tells them what the country wants. And they use that as a way to convince people that they're listening to the country. But what if everyone in the U.S., instead of 1,000 people, actually 1 million people actually just said what they wanted, and they were able to do that quickly, not like a poll every few weeks, but like every day they could just say what they wanted, and they were communicating. It'd be very, very hard for the leaders to ignore that. It would, instead of these polls being a tool that a politician can pull out when they want to listen to some poll, it becomes the will of the people is actually like clear and said, and it becomes very, very difficult for a politician to just blatantly ignore that and just pay attention to other influences that are trying to get them to do their bidding.
Right.
So.
If it was rendered that explicit, then them ignoring it would be a pretty clear indication of.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I'm trying to build. That's one of my projects is.
So it's a communication vision and a clarity vision, transparency.
Yeah. I'm trying to create a mass decision-making platform for millions or billions of people to do that, to communicate and say what they want, and have it be a reliable and trusted way to get an idea of the will of the people. Yeah.
It seems like we're moving in that direction somewhat. That national identity, it's been such a significant part of politics for such a long time. the whole modern era. I mean, since we've moved away from kind of nation states, I guess, from city states, as we've grown into countries, that's really dominated politics. But we're slowly kind of drifting beyond that. I know there are polls that have been talking about polls, but focused upon young people in particular, and their sense of identity politically is much more global now. They don't think of themselves as primarily U.S. citizens or English citizens or French citizens or whatever it might be, but they think of themselves as citizens of the world. So that trend is translating into how people think of themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually think, I think in a way it's inevitable. I think potentially technology, I mean, we're the only technological civilization we know about, humanity, but if we could study, I can imagine different technological civilizations on other planets or throughout time. It may be inevitable that they develop a technology that connects everyone on the planet, which over time really wears away the concept of whatever nations or tribal situations they created in their early history, and eventually it